Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, reading my writing to make the pandemic palatable. From 1994 until 2000, I was the editor in charge of a very lengthy series of novels and short story anthologies that featured Marvel Comics superheroes. They were published jointly by Boulevard Books and the Byron Preiss Multimedia company. I worked for Byron. And we produced a whole bunch of books featuring Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Avengers, the Hulk, the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Captain America, and so on. And these books all had their own sort of internal continuity. We stuck with the iconic versions of the characters, so if there were weird changes going on in the comics at the time or odd things happening, we didn't really necessarily do them. Like in the Fantastic Four comics, Reed Richards was believed dead. Ant-Man was part of the team replacing him, and the Thing had half his face ripped off. We didn't do that. We just stuck with the main Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben members of the Fantastic Four. For that matter, the Spider-Man clone saga we completely ignored. We just stuck with Peter Parker as Spider-Man, and so on. So one of the things we did, like I said, we had an internal continuity. If Dr. Octopus appeared in Diane Duane's The Octopus Agenda, the next time he appeared in the third book of the Doomsday Trilogy, it was consistent with that previous appearance. And stuff would continue from book to book, and we had a large group of supporting characters as well. There were a bunch of New York City cops who appeared in several of the Daredevil and Spider-Man books. And we also had an organization called SAFE, Strategic Action For Emergencies. This was for licensing reasons, actually. Our license did not include S.H.I.E.L.D. We could mention S.H.I.E.L.D., but that was as far as it could go. We couldn't actually feature S.H.I.E.L.D. or any of the S.H.I.E.L.D. characters in our books because it wasn't covered by our license agreement. At the time, from 94 to in the 90s, basically, S.H.I.E.L.D. in the comics was an international organization, specifically answerable to the United Nations. So we decided to create SAFE, which was very specifically a domestic organization. It was run by a guy named Sean Morgan, and there were a bunch of other agents, some of whom you'll see in the story I'm about to read. And they worked with Spider-Man, with the X-Men, with the Hulk, with a bunch of things. Our first Hulk novel was written by Peter David, who was writing the Hulk comic book at the time, and he did a story that he wanted to do in the comics, but which the powers that be at Marvel would not let him. And so he did it in the novel instead. And we maintained the particular status quo that the Hulk was in that novel and at that time in the comics, which was the Hulk, the merged Hulk, or the Professor Hulk. Wasn't called that then, but that was basically it, where the Hulk's personalities were all merged. Bruce Banner, the obnoxious Grey Hulk, and the 5-year-old Green Hulk all were mushed together into one single personality. And there were also fugitives on the run. The story I'm about to read was kind of a continuity patch because it had gotten to the point where they didn't. We had to sort of bring the Hulk's continuity more in line to what was going on in the comics because they were doing other things there, and we had to move it forward. So I did that. So this is a story called Playing It Safe. And here it is. Inside a modest-sized house, on the outskirts of White Plains, New York, a man sits before his computer in a specially reinforced chair needed to support over 1,000 pounds of weight. It is an effort for him to type lightly enough that he doesn't smash the keyboard every time he touches it. It took him a long time to adjust, but he manages. Barely. He works as a freelance consultant, putting his scientific expertise to use for cash wired to an anonymous account set up by a friend. His wife is presently at Richards College, where she teaches religious studies. The names on the lease to this house are Robert and Elizabeth Gaynor, but the names are as false as the impression that he is just a simple freelance consultant. The man at the computer is, in fact, Robert Bruce Banner, one of the foremost experts on gamma radiation in the world, and also the Incredible Hulk. At the moment, Bruce and his wife, Betty, are living the lives of fugitives, taking on assumed names and trying not to draw attention to themselves. Despite some recent public incidents, they've managed to stay in White Plains for some time. Betty loves her job. Bruce is content with his consulting work. They're happy. Robert Bruce Banner has been happy before. He knows it can't possibly last. Major Nefertiti Jones knew something was wrong when she saw that the door to Colonel Sean Morgan's office was closed. The head of SAFE always kept it open on the theory that it made the tiny office a bit more roomy. SAFE, an acronym for Strategic Action For Emergencies, was a relatively new government agency founded to deal with the threats of a paranormal nature beyond the capacity of conventional organizations. It was headquartered at a helicarrier, a mobile flying fortress in which space was at a premium. "Come in," said Morgan's muffled voice in response to Jones's soft tap on the door. Jones entered the room. "Major, have a seat." Morgan indicated the guest chair. He was poker-faced as always, expression placid under his close-cut sandy hair. Only his wintry gray eyes gave away any emotions. Those eyes, Jones knew, said, "We've got a serious problem." Then she noticed the face on the view screen that filled one wall of Morgan's office. The face was pale, with red hair cut almost identically to Morgan's, and wearing smoky, green-tinted glasses. This explained why Morgan called her by the formal Major rather than the more familiar Neff he used in private. "Major, I believe you know Henry Peter Gyrich of the NSA. "We've met," Jones said. Gyrich was the head of Operation Wide Awake, a national security agency project designed to control the so-called mutant menace. Jones first met him when she was with S.H.I.E.L.D., an organization similar to SAFE, although one with more funding. Gyrich nodded his head. "Major, as I was telling Colonel Morgan, we have a situation, though it sounds as if you already know about parts of it." Jones looked to Morgan in confusion. "Mr. Gyrich called in order to inform me of a possible double agent within SAFE." Jones's first thought was, "Oh God, not another one," but said nothing aloud. SAFE had recently been infiltrated by 2 agents of URSA, a group dedicated to recreating the old Soviet Union. The group, working with a gamma-irradiated creature called the Abomination, had killed several legitimate SAFE agents, framed the Hulk for the murder of a senator, and almost blown up the Russian embassy in New York. Gyrich said, "Colonel Morgan then asked me if the mole was Agent Lucia Spilimbergo, to which I said yes." Jones blinked in surprise. "Spilimbergo? The new lab kid?" Spilimbergo was one of a half dozen agents recruited after the Ursa disaster. "I've actually suspected her for a couple of weeks," Morgan said. "Her actions have been a little off-kilter, and she's been making inquiries she shouldn't have. I wasn't completely sure, so I've been sending some false information her way, waiting to see how it played out. However, there seems to be more to it than meets the eye." He looked over at the view screen. Gyrich said, "I flushed out Spilimbergo after checking the results of the psi scanner." Jones had a fairly good knowledge of the inventory of SAFE's helicarrier, and didn't remember such an item on the list. "What psi scanner?" "It's a device that can detect unauthorized uses of telepathy," Gyrich explained. Jones assumed it could detect authorized uses as well. "I have them installed at the HQs of all U.S. intelligence organizations. Without," Morgan added, "informing said organizations." From anyone else, the phrase would have come across as sour, but Morgan spoke matter-of-factly. "You know now," Gyrich said in a light tone. "In any case, we expected to find telepaths hiding out as spies. What we found in your HQ were telepathic waves traveling into the helicarrier, specifically to Spilimbergo. To my way of thinking, that says mind control." Jones let out a breath. "So Spilimbergo might not be responsible for her actions." "That's the theory," Morgan said. "The question now becomes who's doing the controlling." Gyrich looked at his watch. "I have to get to a meeting, so I'll leave that figuring to you. I trust, Colonel, that you'll keep me advised of your progress in dealing with this." Morgan simply nodded. "Good. Gyrich out." As soon as the view screen faded to black, Jones shot Morgan a look. "Since when do we report to him?" "This sort of thing does fall under the NSA's bailiwick," replied Morgan, "though whether it's Gyrich's little corner of the NSA is up for debate. Never mind. We already know who the puppet master is. The leader." Wondering why he waited until Gyrich had signed off to reveal this, Jones asked, "Excuse me?" "I just got the latest computer report on Spilimbergo's actions. She's been asking the database a lot of questions about gamma-powered people in general, and the Hulk in particular." Jones blinked. "So she knows where the Hulk is?" At Morgan's nod, she added, "But she isn't cleared for it." "No, she isn't. I was all set to move on this when Gyrich called and added his little wrinkle. That's why everything points to the leader. Mind control of this sort is right up his alley, and he's got a history, one might say an obsession, with gamma types, what with being one himself." Jones rubbed her chin thoughtfully. The leader began life as Samuel Stearns, a perfectly ordinary manual laborer. Then he was exposed to gamma radiation, and like so many before and after him, was transformed into something more than human. In Stearns' case, it raised his intellect to supergenius levels, and gave him a measure of telepathic abilities, including, Jones recalled, the ability to control the mind of anyone he touched. Aloud, she asked, "So what are you going to tell Gyrich? I assume you didn't tell him about the leader because you don't want him to know that we know where the Hulk is." Morgan nodded. "If I tell him that, he'll drag those Hulkbuster mandroids out of mothballs and blow up White Plains. I'll deal with Gyrich later. Right now, I have 2 concerns. I'll deal with the internal stuff here. I want you to take 5 of your special task squad and go warn the Hulk." "Only 5? I'd rather not make a scene unless we have to. Too big a team will draw attention." "Then why not just call him? Or send 1 person? In case there is a scene, I want you prepared for it. Load for Bearneff. The leader tends to employ nasty customers." Jones nodded. "We'll be there in 20, Colonel." "I do not believe this," Betty Banner muttered as she sipped coffee from a mug. Jones said nothing in reply, but merely sipped her own coffee. She had decided to take a simple approach, leaving the rest of the team behind in the hovercraft, hidden behind a ridge a couple of 100 feet from the Gaynor house, and going in alone to explain the situation to the Banners in person. Jones had been invited in and offered coffee by Mrs. Banner, a lean, athletic woman with straight hair whose red hue came from a bottle. She had just returned from a day of teaching, and so wore a frilly purple silk blouse and black linen pants. They had gathered in the medium-sized living room, Jones on the couch, Mrs. Banner on a large armchair, and Dr. Banner, all 7 feet and 1,150 pounds of him, standing in the corner as unobtrusively as his size and green skin and hair would allow. As was his wont these days, Banner wore a black tank top and beige slacks. Idly, Jones wondered where on earth he shopped for clothes at his size. But then she thought anything's better than those purple pants. "Is there anything you can do?" Mrs. Banner asked. "We're working on it," Jones said. "For now, we're concerned for your safety." For the first time since Jones arrived, Dr. Banner spoke. "I'd be more worried about Stearns' safety if I were you. Where is he?" "We haven't located him yet." "Isn't he supposed to be dead?" Betty asked. Dr. Banner shook his head. "I've seen him shot, stabbed, and blown up more times than I can count, and he keeps coming back. He suffered every mortal trauma short of me ripping his head off, an option I will seriously consider when I find him." He cracked his knuckles, creating a sound that reminded Jones of machine gun fire. "Right now, our main concern," Jones says, "is who the leader might send after you. His mole only gained this information within the last 24 hours. We're ready to back you up as needs be, or help you relocate." Mrs. Banner turned to her husband. Jones knew the woman's background. She'd been through more in her life than any 12 people should ever have to deal with. In the last year alone, she'd given birth to twins who had died, been kidnapped by a renegade Hydra agent, been in the Russian embassy when it was taken over by revolutionaries, and almost been charbroiled by the Super Skrull. That she hadn't gone completely crazy was a testament to her strength, and Jones had to admire her. "Bruce, I don't want to leave here," she said with the determination of a homesteader in an old western who wouldn't let the evil cattle rustlers run her off her land. "Betty, listen, I'm tired of running, Bruce. It seems like that's all we've done since we got married. Hell, it's all I've done since I met you. But I've been happy here. I like teaching at Richards. I like being here with you. I don't want to lose this because of some vague threat." "Stearns is never vague, hon. If he's trying to track me down, he's going to send someone after us." Before the conversation could continue, Jones's wrist unit beeped. She looked at it to see the LCD provide an image of Agent White, 1/5 of the squad she brought along. "Major, we have a situation. 4 bogies heading straight for your location in some kind of hovercraft. Before you ask, the hovercraft doesn't match any of the configurations in our database." Jones had assumed as much. White wouldn't have called them bogies if they were the Avengers. "What kind of bogies?" "Paranormal. Beyond that, all I can say for sure is that they aren't mutants, and they aren't gamma-enhanced." "All right, stand by, but be ready to move." She turned to the Banners. "I'm afraid the decision's been taken out of our hands. I suspect that whoever's approaching intends to attack." "Let them," Dr. Banner said, moving toward the front door. "Major, if you'd be so kind as to get my wife to a safe location." "Wait a minute, Bruce," Mrs. Banner said, standing. "You're not—" "Major, we've got an ID," White's voice sounded from Jones's communicator. "It's the UFOs." Dr. Banner rolled his eyes. "Figures. Last time I tangled with those Fantastic Four wannabes, they were working for Stearns. I can take care of them." "Maybe, but my orders are to back you up, Dr. Banner, and I intend to. Before we left the helicarrier, I did a check on all the leaders' known lackeys and stockpiled the hovercraft's arsenal accordingly, including some weaponry that will help against the UFOs." Dr. Banner then moved across the living room to the front door in 2 strides. No, Jones realized, they weren't strides. A stride is a step that carries the entire body along. Dr. Banner moved 20 feet in 2 small, economical steps. So small, in fact, that it seemed more like the house moved itself 7 yards to the south in order to accommodate the Incredible Hulk, rather than vice versa. "Do what you want, Major. Just stay out of my way." With that, he opened the door and walked out. Jones sighed with relief. Although the Hulk and Safe had crossed paths thrice in the last few months, Jones was only in on one of those encounters. She had half expected him to cop an attitude and make Jones's life more difficult. She brought her wrist communicator up to her lips. Let's move, people. White, you get over here to keep an eye on Mrs. Banner. Jones glanced over at the woman to see that she was rooting around in a box. She eventually produced an old Army-issue revolver. Jones smiled. She can take care of herself, but I'd rather she had some backup in case the UFOs try to get to Banner through her. Elfman, Bartholomew, take up positions on the perimeter of the battle area. Elfman, take the harpoon for X-ray. Bartholomew, the Chem 3A for vapor. Banks, you stay in the hovercraft. Your job is to contain this as much as possible. You three, wait for my signal. Montenegro, you get to handle crowd control until the local cops get here, and then work with them on it. I want zero civilian risk. Got it? Banks spoke for the whole team when she said, Understood, Major. Jones turned to Mrs. Banner to see her checking her weapon to make sure it was loaded and ready. The Hulk's wife said, I'll be fine until Agent White gets here, Major. You go help Bruce. She held the gun with all the assurance of the army brat she was, and her face reminded Jones of the gang leaders on the streets of Los Angeles, the ones who lived to the age of 30, that is, though the effect, when combined with her elegant work clothes, was almost comical. Looking out the living room window, Jones saw Dr. Banner standing on the sidewalk looking up. The Major followed his gaze to see a flying craft headed toward the ground, carrying 4 odd-looking passengers. White hadn't been kidding about the craft's unfamiliar configuration. Nefertiti Jones had worked for the LAPD, the CIA, and SHIELD before joining SAFE, and had seen all manner of flying vehicles. None of them matched the sleekness and elegance of the craft the UFOs rode. Dr. Banner painted a nice big green target for the UFOs to center their attention on, so Jones decided to take the sneaky approach and go around back, not letting the UFOs know she was there until the last possible second. As she exited through the back door and moved around the house, she reviewed what she knew of the UFOs. A quartet led by a mid-level industrialist named Simon Utrecht, who tried to duplicate the accident that gave the Fantastic Four their powers. This was back when Bruce Banner and the Savage version of the Hulk shared a Jekyll and Hyde existence. Banner stumbled across Utrecht's mission control and forced the rocket to land before the cosmic radiation killed the passengers. However, the cosmic rays had done their work well enough to turn the 4 of them into superhumans. For lack of a better name, they called themselves the UFOs, and proceeded to have a rather undistinguished career as supervillains against the likes of the Hulk and the Avengers. Jones took up a position behind an overgrown privet hedge. This thing needs to be pruned, she thought. She tried to imagine the Hulk in a straw hat, whistling while he trimmed the hedges with an oversized pair of clippers. The image wouldn't take. The UFOs disembarked from the hovercraft which they had put down in the middle of the street. Dr. Banner stood on the sidewalk in front of the Gaynor house, shaking his head, arms folded across his barrel chest. Simon, 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 why must you keep doing this? Doesn't my constant beating you guys into cutlets get boring for you? I know it does for me, he yawned. Vector, the supervillain who had once been Simon Utrecht, stood at the front of the foursome. He was a tall, skinny figure, wearing an ugly yellow and orange suit patterned with what Jones assumed were representations of molecules. Do not mock us, Hulk, Vector warned. We have a mission, and you will not stop us from performing it. Kind of a come-down for you guys, isn't it? Dr. Banner asked. I mean, the big-shot head of Utrecht Industries, reduced to playing an errand boy for the leader? Enough jabbering, said Ironclad, a large man covered in a chrome-like substance that made him look like the Silver Surfer on steroids. Let's get stomping! Yeah, said X-Ray, floating in the air above his teammates. His entire body glowed an eerie red color, but his voice sounded like that of a teenager trying desperately to sound cool. Vapor, an attractive brunette, said nothing. She simply transformed her body into a green gas. You know, Dr. Banner said calmly, I was having a pleasant afternoon, diddling around on the computer, welcoming my wife home, and you guys had to ruin it. You've made me extremely cranky. And you wouldn't like me when I'm cranky. Switching her wrist unit to surveillance mode, Jones saw that White had entered the house and taken up position in the living room. The others were positioned around the perimeter, waiting for her signal. Dr. Banner continued, Come on, guys. I beat you when I had the intellect of a 5-year-old. I beat you when I had the intellect of a genius. And I beat you when I had no intellect to speak of. What makes you think today will be different? Vector smiled. Only one way to find out. He raised his hand. Vector generally used his ability to repel any kind of matter or energy by pointing. Jones unholstered the 9mm she'd been issued when she joined the LAPD. It still came in handy every once in a while. For all his power, Simon Utrecht was still just an ordinary man in an ugly suit. She fired. Vector staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. Then all hell broke loose. Vector stumbled to the ground, still clutching his shoulder, which now bled rather profusely. Vapor and X-Ray moved toward Dr. Banner, who remained where he was, arms still folded. Jones started toward Vector, hoping to restrain him, but Ironclad cut her off. Then Banks took the hovercraft out of hiding and fired on Ironclad. It didn't hurt the brute, but it distracted him long enough for Jones to whip out her laser pistol and fire it at the ground beneath Ironclad. The blast weakened the pavement enough for it to collapse under the UFO's weight. Banks took advantage of Ironclad's immobile state to take a few more shots at him with the hovercraft's weaponry. As soon as Vapor and X-Ray got close to him, Dr. Banner clapped his hands. The displaced air sent X-Ray tumbling head over heels through the air and dispersed the glass cloud Vapor had turned into. X-Ray recovered quickly. "Now you're dead meat, Banner. See, I know how to stop you." "Really?" said Dr. Banner with a smirk. "You'll succeed where entire armies and dozens of supervillains, including yourself, have failed?" "Yep. See, all I gotta do is hit you with the right frequency of gamma radiation," X-Ray then pointed at Banner, "and you'll revert to Bruce Banner." Gamma radiation being invisible, the only effect of X-Ray's attack Jones could see was that Dr. Banner started to glow a bit greener. Then the Jade Giant just laughed. Vapor coalesced into human form alongside Vector before Jones could reach him. The Major recalled that the two of them were lovers. "Vector," Vapor said, "are you all right?" "The mission," Vector gasped in pain, "must complete mission." Jones walked up to Vapor and aimed her laser pistol at the woman's head. "Please, Ms. Darnell, you don't move if you don't want to get hurt." Vapor laughed. "You hurt me? Do you know who I am?" As she spoke, she once again started to form into whatever kind of gas she thought might incapacitate or kill Jones. "You're a woman who can change into any gaseous substance, which makes you pretty vulnerable," Jones said calmly. "Vulnerable?" Vapor's voice sounded from the cloud that floated toward Jones. "Don't make me laugh." "Didn't plan to. Now!" At her shout, Dr. Bartholomew fired the Chem 3A at Vapor. Dr. Banner reached out and grabbed X-Ray's arms. His tank top was in shreds. "The old tricks won't work on me, kid." But the leader said," X-Ray stammered. Before the youngest UFO could finish his sentence, the Hulk, it was impossible to think of him as Dr. Banner now, whirled him around and threw him toward the ridge to the east. The same ridge behind which the safe agents had hidden the hovercraft. In front of Jones, Vapor's gaseous cloud suddenly turned into a weird-shaped rock and fell to the ground. "Nice shot," Jones said. Bartholomew simply smiled in reply. Elfman trotted over, carrying a modified harpoon gun that fired a lead mesh net. "You two find where Banner threw X-Ray and restrain him." They nodded and went off. Jones placed a set of handcuffs on Vector's wrists. The UFO's leader seemed to be going into shock. Not surprising, given the amount of blood that was flowing from his wounded shoulder. That just left Ironclad for the moment. Unfortunately, Banks, a good pilot with comparatively little field experience, had made the mistake of getting in too close, giving Ironclad a chance to grab the hovercraft. He didn't have great leverage, crammed as he was in the hole in the street, but it was enough to knock the craft off course and send it careening into the very privet hedge that Joan had initially taken refuge behind. The Hulk smiled. "Why, thank you, Ironclad. I've been meaning to trim that." Ironclad clambered out of the hole and faced the Hulk. "Yeah, well, now it's your turn to be trimmed, Greenie. Just you and me now. Irresistible force and the immovable object." "The leader's been giving you comic books to read, eh?" The Hulk once again cracked his knuckles. "There's something you all keep forgetting." Jones spoke into her wrist unit. "Banks, come in! Russell, are you all right?" The sound of coughing issued from the tinny speakers then. "I'm fine, Major, but this craft is shot to hell. Morgan's gonna have to call us a cab." Meanwhile, the Hulk swung a right hook at Ironclad, who blocked it, leaving him wide open for a left uppercut, which sent the silvery supervillain flying down the street. The Hulk leapt to where Ironclad had skidded to a halt. "I'm stronger than anyone," the Hulk growled. He grabbed Ironclad by the chin and picked him up. "I'm tougher than anyone." He punched Ironclad again, sending him into the same direction in which he'd sent X-Ray. "And I'm smarter than anyone." Jones followed the Hulk as he took another flying leap to finish Ironclad off. She noticed Montenegro was successfully keeping the civilians far back, and that the local cops had shown up and were forming a roadblock. Jones ran through the wooded area that the Hulk had leapt over, coming out at a clearing to see the Hulk pounding Ironclad into the ground. Literally. It was like watching a big green hammer being applied to a chrome tent peg. About 20 feet to the northeast, Bartholomew and Elfman watched appreciatively. Behind them, X-Ray struggled with the lead net to no avail. A trifle winded, Jones approached the Hulk. "Finished?" she asked between deep breaths. "More or less, yeah." He turned to Jones. "What exactly did you do to Vapor? You ever hear of a guy named Chemistro?" The Hulk shook his head, which actually created a small breeze. "Fourth rater from New York, mixed it up with Power Man a few times, then went straight. He sold the patent for his alchemy gun to the government." "Alchemy gun?" the Hulk parroted skeptically. Jones shrugged. "That's what he called it. It can change the chemical composition of certain substances. We based the Chem 3A on it, and it changed Vapor from whatever gunk she turned into solid gunk." The Hulk nodded and scratched his nose. "Very scientific. And I see you found something to hold Fallout Boy over there." "I don't get it!" X-Ray shouted. "The leader said this would be easy. He said that frequency of gamma radiation was guaranteed to revert you back." "Well, butthead," replied the Hulk, "I'd say that the leader was playing you for fools, but that would imply that you four jackasses could possibly be played for anything else. Now." The Hulk was interrupted by a huge thunderclap that came from the direction of the street his house was on. Before Jones could react, the Hulk leapt back over the tree line. Jones ran in the same direction, barking back at her men. "Stay here, keep an eye on these two." Then she put her wrist unit to her lips. "Report!" Montenegro replied, "Major, the guy on the ground broke through the cuffs. Then he just lifted his finger and the whole house collapsed." "Oh, hell," Jones thought. Then he heard a plaintive cry from two of the most powerful lungs on the planet. "Betty!" Jones arrived at the street to see Montenegro, Banks, and two local cops, all holding guns to Vector's head. Vector lying on the street with a big smile on his face, his cuffs in pieces on either side of him, and the Hulk tearing through the massive pile of wreckage that used to be a modest one-story house. "Major, I'm sorry, I didn't get to him in time," Montenegro said without looking at Jones. She refused to take her eye off Vector. "White and Mrs. Banner are still in there." Vector said in a dreamy voice, "Mission accomplished." Then he fell unconscious. Muttering a stream of curses she'd learned growing up on the streets of South Central Los Angeles, Jones followed the Hulk into the wreckage. She found him kneeling over two bodies. White's sprawled over Mrs. Banner's. A large chunk of wood protruded from White's neck. "Betty's alive," Dr. Banner said. "Looks like your man saved her life." "Yeah," Jones said. She'd had comrades die before. It would happen again. She'd never get used to it. At least he went down doing his job, she thought, but that provided little comfort. What followed was cleanup. Luckily, the restraints designed to restrict superpowers had survived the hovercraft crash and were applied to the three of the UFOs. "What about her?" Montenegro asked, pointing at the rock that was Vapor. Bartholomew said, "Just leave her as is. We'll revert her when we get back to HQ." The mention of HQ reminded Jones that she needed to check in. The communication system in the craft was shot. She hoped the wrist unit's limited range would be good enough. Morgan had said he would bring the helicarrier nearer to New York. Sure enough, Morgan replied. Jones gave him the full story. "How's Mrs. Banner?" Morgan asked. "Injured. An ambulance is on the way." Morgan shook his head. "No, that'll draw even more attention. I'm sending Clyde down with another craft to take you back. We'll treat Mrs. Banner on the carrier." A voice rumbled. "Is that Morgan?" Jones looked up to see the Hulk approaching her. X-Ray's barrage had all but destroyed his tank top, and his pants were torn in several places as well. Aside from that, and his mussed-up hair, there was no evidence that he'd just been in a fight. No scars, no abrasions, nothing. Must be handy to be almost invulnerable, Jones thought. In response to his question, she nodded, held up her wrist so he could see Morgan's image. "Morgan, you are going to tell me that you've triangulated Stearns' location, and you're going to give me that location, correct?" The colonel looked bemused. "I am I?" "Don't get cute with me, Morgan," the Hulk shot back. "I want Stearns, and I want him now." Before Morgan could reply, Jones said, "With all due respect, Doctor, if you're thinking of charging into the leader's hideout with a full head of steam, think again. After he blew up your house, Vector said, 'Mission accomplished.' I don't think the UFOs were after you directly. I think they were here to make you mad enough to go off half-cocked, so they blew up your house and hurt your wife. Now, you told Ironclad that you're smarter than anyone, so use those brains. You go charging in, you're playing right into the leader's hands." Dr. Banner scowled at her. "Maybe. But I'm tired of his little head games. He wants me to go charging in. Fine. I'll go charging in. The alternative is to sit around waiting for him to send another bunch of losers after me. He turned to look at the colonel's image on the small screen. Morgan, tell me where he is so I can go pound him. So you can go pound him, Morgan repeated, still bemused. This is my fight, my life that Stearns has messed around with. Give me the location, take care of my wife, and stay the hell out of my way. Do you read me? Oh yeah, I read you, Morgan replied. And, in the unlikely event that you are ever elected President of the United States, I will consider your word to be my command. Since that hasn't happened yet, understand this. Your wife is alive right now because of the sacrifice of one of my agents. If you imagine that I'm going to sit on my hands and play doctor for Mrs. Banner while you go and storm the leader's den alone... Morgan paused to take a breath. Well, then you have a very vivid imagination. Dr. Banner stared at Morgan's image for several seconds. Then he said in a tight voice, Do you know where he is? Morgan turned to address Jones. The psionic waves that controlled Agent Spillenbergo emanated from an abandoned limestone mine just outside a small Pennsylvania town called East Brady. There are, however, two problems. One is that the waves have stopped. The other is that we've had to arrest Spillenbergo. She dug into a file she shouldn't have and set off several alarms. I'd say the leader knows we're onto him now, assuming he hasn't already known from the get-go, which I strongly suspect. You have a latitude and longitude on this town? The Hulk asked. Morgan stared for a moment, then consulted something on his desk. It's on the Allegheny River, 40.59 degrees north by 79.36 degrees west. The limestone mine itself is on the other side of the river from the town, about 2 miles down. He peered closer at the desk. Route 68. We'll meet you there. Just don't get in my way. Dr. Banner stepped back and leapt westward. He was out of sight within 3 seconds. Jones then noticed that Montenegro had been standing behind Dr. Banner. He can find it just based on latitude and longitude? With no equipment? Unable to contain a small smile, Jones said, Don't let that gruff exterior fool you, Lupe. He's still one of the biggest brains on the planet. I guess. So now what? Now, Morgan said, causing Jones to start. She had briefly forgotten about the colonel. You wait for Clyde to bring you back up here. I'm taking a team to meet Banner at that mine. You're taking? Jones said with only mild surprise. Morgan had never been above leading a field mission himself. No choice. You're busy, Ballard's still in the hospital, and Fine's still pulling the vault back together after the Thinker mess. All right. Good luck. Thanks. Morgan's face disappeared. Jones looked up to see another hovercraft approaching. Lupe, you and Russell get Mrs. Banner prepped for transport. Montenegro nodded and went off to carry out her orders. Jones looked up at the sky in the direction the Hulk had leapt. Good luck, Doctor, she thought. I think you're going to need it. Safe Agent R.B. Hayes sat impatiently in the co-pilot seat of the short-range hovercraft. Once they got going, they would reach the leader's apparent base in minutes, but they couldn't leave until Colonel Morgan arrived. Hayes looked forward to this mission, and not just because he enjoyed going out into the field. Sean Morgan's policy of taking the science types into the field rather than confining them to the laboratory, if they can't survive in the real world and they don't belong in this line of work, he had said, was the primary reason Hayes had left his job as an FBI lab tech to join SAFE. But he particularly wanted this field assignment because of the Hulk. Hayes had met Bruce Banner in college when he was an undergrad and Banner was working on his doctorate. He had one of the most amazing minds Hayes had ever encountered, and also one of the most unassuming physical presences. The pudgy undergrad could sympathize at the time, and continued to after that mind was forced to share its existence with a barely articulate savage. But now that intellect lived on inside the savage's body. To Hayes, it was the best of all possible worlds, and it beleaguered the hell out of him to see Dr. Banner reduced to a fugitive's life when he could be doing so much more. R.B. Hayes deeply envied Bruce Banner his current existence. It was the dream of every 99-pound weakling of a science geek to find himself with a Charles Atlas physique. Banner had achieved that dream. Morgan finally arrived and took the pilot seat. He said nothing as he went through the checklist, then guided the craft out of SAFE's helicarrier. Hayes looked down at the bank of equipment in front of him, specifically to the display from the gamma track on the monitor. Sir, he said to Morgan, I'm afraid Dr. Banner's going to beat us there by a few minutes. Morgan nodded. They flew over a rather pleasant, almost pastoral area. Miles of greenery and hills broken by the occasional road, house, or creek. One road stood out, Pennsylvania Route 68, according to the map, which ran mostly parallel to a creek and a railroad track. And Morgan piloted the craft over that, landing in front of what was once probably a thriving limestone mine. As they landed, Hayes saw the two deep, vaguely foot-shaped indentations in the ground that marked the Hulk's arrival. Then Hayes heard the scream. Let's go, Morgan said. He led the charge, followed by 5 agents. 2 held back, as did Hayes. The screams grew louder. Hayes followed the two agents in slowly, making sure he remained between and behind them. He consulted his handheld gamma track, but only saw one blip. If the leader was here, he was long gone, or had figured out a way to hide the unique radiation signature that he shared with all gamma-irradiated creatures from the scanner. With the leader, one was as likely as the other. The sound of laser fire joined the screams. Hayes heard Morgan barking orders, but couldn't make them out. Hayes examined one of the computer terminals that lined the walls, but found absolutely no data, not even an operating system. The terminal had power going to it, but it had no software that he could find. The trio soon came upon a large clearing and saw the remaining safe agents firing at the three large robots that shot out long metal spikes. Then Hayes caught sight of the Hulk and gasped. Over a dozen spikes jutted from various parts of his body, green blood oozing around them. Those things must be made out of adamantium to penetrate his hide, Hayes thought. Banner was trying to pull the spikes out so his healing ability could take care of the wounds, but even with that, it had to hurt. Luckily, Morgan's arrival distracted the robots, who peculiarly did not fire the spikes at the safe agents, just ordinary bullets. Spikes are only meant for the Hulk, Hayes realized, but why? That would only slow him down for a few minutes. At best, they just make him angry, and that's pretty stupid. I mean, the angrier he gets, the stronger he gets. Everyone knows that. So why would someone as smart as the leader do that? As he pulled out the last spike, the Hulk let loose with a primal scream that chilled Hayes to the bone. Little evidence of the brilliant scientific mind that Hayes had met at Cal State years ago could be seen. Indeed, he gave a snarl worthy of the old Savage Hulk. "I swear, Stearns, I'll kill you. You hear? You'll die. Hulk will smash Big Head!" Again, Hayes was chilled. He's not supposed to talk like that anymore. Then he saw something he didn't expect. The Hulk started to shrink and change color. Muscles seemed to collapse. Bones reshaped themselves. Skin lightened and paled. The shouting didn't stop, though. "Hulk will smash!" Within seconds, the unassuming physical presence of Bruce Banner knelt in the center of the room, legs awash in the remains of the Hulk's massive slacks. But the cries of "Hulk smash!" continued to emanate from his lips. "My God," someone said. Only then did Hayes take stock of the rest of his surroundings and realize that Morgan and the others had taken care of the robots in fairly short order. Their metallic remains lay on the floor only 20 feet in front of Banner. "How the hell did that happen?" someone asked, pointing to the skinny, half-naked scientist. He got really angry," Hayes said. "Maybe it's a side effect." "Side effect?" "Of this new merged personality of his. Maybe it's the price he pays for having access to Banner's intellect while he's in the Hulk's..." "Hulk smash puny humans!" a small voice cried at the top of his meager lungs. Banner disentangled himself from the Hulk's oversized pants and leapt on Morgan, trying to punch the Colonel in the chest and not making much headway against the Kevlar. Morgan grabbed Banner by the wrists and tossed him at the two agents who had been sticking with Hayes. "You two take care of him. Make sure he doesn't hurt himself. Hayes, check out this equipment. Let's see what we've got here." "Not much from what I've been able to see, sir," Hayes said, moving to another terminal. He typed a few keys, pressed a few buttons, but nothing happened. "As far as I can tell, everything in this place has been wiped clean." He looked around the room, and something caught his eye. "Hello! This is interesting." He went over to a mechanism with a small podium-like terminal attached to a 1-inch-high circular platform. One had to stand on the platform to operate the terminal. "Jeez," one of the agents said. "Looks like something out of Star Trek." "You're not that far off," Hayes said. "I'm pretty sure this is a teleporter of some kind." Morgan asked, "Can you tell who used it last?" Hayes shook his head. "Nah, it's been wiped, just like everything else." He put his hand to the side of the terminal. "Still warm, though. Whoever did use it last used it pretty recently. Probably set it up to wipe the software as soon as he left." "Wonderful," Morgan muttered. "Let go of Hulk or Hulk will smash!" Hayes turned to see Banner frantically leaping into the air, his arms held by the two agents. Hayes found it hard to believe that the red face currently snarling, spitting, and shouting was the same face that had calmly lectured him on nuclear physics over a decade ago. Suddenly, R.B. Hayes didn't envy Bruce Banner quite so much. "Colonel?" said one of the Banner restrainers. Morgan sighed and turned to the agent next to him. "Johansson, get the medical kit out of the hovercraft. There's got to be a sedative in there." "Yes, sir." "Hayes, check out the rest of the facility. I seriously doubt Stearns left anything behind, but let's make sure." The pudgy agent nodded, but couldn't stop staring at the mass of inarticulate rage that stood before him. The misanthropic savagery of the Incredible Hulk trapped inside a 99-pound weakling. It was the worst of all possible worlds. Shuddering, Hayes got to work. Sean Morgan looked up from Nefertiti Jones's report on the fight against the UFOs when the Hulk walked in. back to his usual 7-foot green-skinned self. At first, Morgan saw no evidence that this same man had been a raving, diminutive scientist only an hour before. Then he saw the Hulk's green eyes. Morgan knew that look. He'd seen it 20 years ago in the mirror, following the first time he got shot after joining the army, and he truly became aware of his own mortality. He saw it again 20 minutes ago in Joan White's eyes when he told her that her husband wouldn't be coming home. "You're looking much better than the last time I saw you. What was that, anyhow?" "Let's just call it an unfortunate side effect and leave it at that, okay, Morgan?" the Hulk snapped. Morgan shrugged. "Fine. How's Mrs. Banner?" "The doctor said she's had a mild concussion and some contusions. We'll be able to leave in a couple of hours." He gave Morgan a long look. "And when we do, I don't want you following me." Morgan sighed. He had expected this. "I understand." The Hulk obviously hadn't expected that response. "You do?" "You were found once. It could happen again." Nodding, the Hulk said, "Exactly. It's not that I don't trust you. I do. You're one of only a small handful of people I can say that about right now." Morgan blinked. He knew how hard an admission that had to be for Banner to make, and he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "But I don't trust the people you report to, and I can't trust the people who work under you. When Betty and I go, we can't have anyone following us, and no gamma track spying on us." "Funny thing about the gamma track," Morgan said. "It's developed a nasty bug. Keeps giving false readings. We'll probably have to scrap it." The Hulk frowned. "When did this happen?" "About 3 seconds ago." A small smile played on the Hulk's lips. The intercom on Morgan's desk beeped. "Colonel?" said the voice of Neff Jones. "Yes?" "Agent Spillenbergo was asked to speak to you and Dr. Banner, Colonel. She said it was important, but that she'd only speak to you two." "Maybe she has a message from Stearns," the Hulk said. Morgan shrugged. "All right, we'll be right down." The trip to the detention wing of the helicarrier didn't take long. Lucia Spillenbergo, an athletic, olive-skinned woman with curly, dark hair cropped short, sat forlornly in one of the 6 cells. Upon the arrival of Morgan and the Hulk, she rose and approached the bars. "At last," she said in a small voice. "I have a message?" Then her eyes glazed over, and she spoke with another male voice. "Greetings, Colonel Morgan, Dr. Banner." The Hulk snarled. "Stearns." "Please, Doctor. Samuel Stearns was a lowly manual laborer. I am the leader. You of all people should appreciate the distinction. In any case, I hope you aren't going to be so foolish as to try to find me. You can rest assured that I will find you soon enough, when my plan comes to fruition." "And what plan would that be?" the Hulk asked. "Oh, it's the same plan as ever, Doctor. You should be familiar with it by now. We've certainly danced the dance enough times. But the dance does change with each new transformation you undergo. I've planted several of my agents within assorted intelligence agencies around the world, and the one I placed in S.H.I.E.L.D. turned up a most fascinating file regarding your new predilection for reverting to your Bruce Banner physical form with the Savage Hulk's mental processes when you get too angry." Morgan tensed. The leader must have seen this through Spillenbergo's eyes, since he said, "Don't worry, Colonel. That mole has long since been terminated. And unlike you, the hierarchy then never got onto him. I commend you for that, by the way. In any event," the leader's voice continued through Spillenbergo's lips, "I found this new wrinkle fascinating. So I set events in motion using young Ms. Spillenbergo here to test your mettle. Safe was kind enough to provide a roadmap for you to find my Pennsylvania lair, allowing me to see this savage Banner up close. It was most instructive." Morgan shook his head. They had swept the limestone mine thoroughly and found no evidence of surveillance devices, yet the leader still managed to see everything that happened there. "Instructive," the Hulk said. "That's all you can call it. Don't insult either of us by being surprised, Doctor. After all, we are men of science, both of us. One must gather data, and the data I gathered will prove tremendously useful. As a bonus, I was finally able to rid myself of Utrecht and his imbecilic playmates. They were becoming a hindrance, and I can assure you, Colonel Morgan, that I will not be making any silly attempts to break them out, as they say. Good day to you both." Spillenbergo's eyes returned to normal. Then she collapsed. Before Morgan could react, the Hulk ripped the door off the cell and knelt over the young woman's prone form, checking for a pulse. "She's dead," he announced. The next morning, the Hulk and his wife stood in the helicarrier's dock, standing outside one of Safe's hovercraft. Jones was explaining things to the Banners as Morgan entered. "It'll come back to the carrier as soon as you disembark, and the flight plan will wipe itself as soon as it gets back here." "Good," Mrs. Banner said. Morgan approached the trio. "I'm sorry things turned out this way." "And I'm sorry about your 2 agents," Mrs. Banner said. "Did they find a cause of death for Spillenbergo?" the Hulk asked. Morgan nodded. A blood vessel in her brain burst. She died instantly. The Hulk shook his head. Joan said, "You realize that by cutting yourself off like this, we won't be able to help you. You'll be completely on your own from here on." The Hulk actually laughed at that. So what else is new? And that's the story. The only way you'll find the Ultimate Hulk that this was in is at a used bookstore, and it might be expensive, might not. It was edited by Stan Lee and Peter David, and it also features stories by a bunch of people, including Peter David. Peter wrote a story called, what was the title? The Last Titan, which he actually adapted into comic book form for the Hulk: The End, but it originally appeared here. Both Stan and Peter wrote introductions as well. There's stories by Dennis Brabham, Danny Fingeroth, Will Murray, Richard C. White and Stephen A. Roman, Pierce Askegren, Glenn Greenberg, Joe Duffy, Nancy Holder and Christopher Golden, Sholly Fish, Thomas DJ, Steve Lyons, James A. Wolfe, Stan Timmons, Ken Groby, and myself and Peter David. Cool book. You should try to find it if you can. Thank you very much for watching. Please check me out online at DeCandido.net. Please support me on Patreon, patreon.com/KRAD. There's lots of cool stuff there that you can get: movie reviews, TV reviews, all sorts of neat stuff. Cat pictures, too. And you can read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon, and please stay safe.